All right, let's just dive right into this explainer. Today, we're unpacking how a literal micro-budget horror film managed to tap into our absolute deepest cultural anxieties and, in the process, completely shattered box office records. We're talking about the 2025 supernatural horror hit Obsession, directed by Curry Barker. Now, this isn't just your standard movie review. We are going to break down exactly how a relatively small, independently funded project captured the modern zeitgeist so perfectly that it exploded into a massive global sensation. So let's get into it. To really wrap our heads around the sheer scale of this cultural phenomenon, you just have to look at this absolutely staggering number, $428 million worldwide. And honestly, the wildest part, this was pulled off by a $750,000 indie movie, directed by a 26-year-old former YouTube sketch comedian. It just goes to show, you really don't need a $100 million studio budget to resonate with a massive global audience. You just need to strike a very specific, very raw nerve and maybe, just maybe, know a thing or two about internet virality. Part 1. A record-breaking phenomenon. We're going to explore exactly how director Curry Barker's second feature film became an absolute lightning rod for 2020's internet culture. The evolution of this film was just incredibly rapid. I mean, it went from a quick 26-day shoot in Los Angeles back in October 2024 straight to making actual history at the Toronto International Film Festival. That's where Focus Features swooped in and acquired the distribution rights for somewhere between $14 and $15 million, which, by the way, is the highest price ever commanded by a genre film in TIFF's entire history. From there, Jason Blum and Blumhouse Productions jumped on board, leading to this massive theatrical release in May 2026. It is basically a Hollywood Cinderella story, just, with a whole lot more blood and psychological terror. Moving on to Part 2, The Modern Monkey's Paw. To truly grasp the thematic depth of this movie, we really have to look at how it deceptively sets itself up as this sort of Gen Z romantic comedy, or maybe a quirky drama about unrequited love, right before taking a very, very dark turn. So the whole narrative is built heavily around the classic monkey's paw trope. Basically, our protagonist, Bear, played by Michael Johnston, is harboring this massive, secret crush on his friend and music store coworker, Nikki. Well, after a string of really stressful events, including the tragic death of his cat, Bear kind of just wanders into a crystal shop. He impulsively buys this cheap mass-produced gift shop novelty called a Wish Willow, and then, totally frustrated with his inability to just confess his feelings to her, he snaps the toy and wishes that Nikki would love him more than anything else in the entire world. And well, Bear gets exactly what he asked for. But the reality? The reality is this volatile, terrifying version of Nikki. The wish doesn't just make her like him, it completely overrides her free will. The original Nikki is trapped in this unseen hell, while her body is quite literally piloted by an obsessed doppelganger that starts committing acts of horrific violence. I'm talking about feeding Bear a sandwich made from his dead cat's remains and brutally murdering their friends. It's essentially an old-school pulp morality tale, but dragged kicking and screaming into the modern era. Which brings us to Part 3, Toxic Desires and Entitlement. What's so fascinating about this narrative is the really dark cultural critique that's just bubbling beneath the surface of all that blood and gore. The film actually acts as a really sharp interrogation of male entitlement. See, Bear considers himself a nice guy. He isn't overtly aggressive at the start of the film, but the story exposes how his supposedly harmless, unrequited crush is actually deeply, deeply possessive. It literalizes the sheer danger of viewing another human being purely as a solution to your own loneliness, rather than, as a real person with their own autonomy and their own desires. And Bear's moral descent is really where the true terror of this story lies. He harbors these feelings, he makes this incredibly selfish wish, but the real turning point? That happens when he realizes the real Nikki is trapped in torment, while this possessed version performs absolute devotion for him. And instead of reversing the wish, he hesitates. He actually chooses his own twisted comfort. He continually rationalizes his choices, even as innocent friends like Sarah and Ian are drawn into the violence and brutally murdered. He becomes this perfect, terrifying portrait of complete moral cowardice. Part 4, The Simulated Girlfriend Experience. Now, there is a fascinating parallel here between Bear's supernatural wish and modern digital relationships, which is a massive reason why this movie resonated so strongly with audiences today.
One of our sources put it perfectly, saying, Nikki's cosmically forced devotion to Bear feels about as genuine as a relationship with an AI chatbot, only a whole lot messier. Think about it. In our current era of AI companions and parasocial relationships, treating Nikki not as a real person but as an artificially programmed companion designed only to fulfill a fantasy, that is incredibly relevant right now. Bear basically programmed a human being to be his perfect, compliant partner, completely stripping away the friction, the boundaries, and the back and forth that actually makes real human connection authentic.
So, looking at it objectively, the film functions as a really unapologetic critique of internet-era relationship dynamics. It dives straight into toxic manosphere ideologies and the objectification of women, and it forces the audience to ask a pretty uncomfortable question. When some people say they want someone to love them, do they actually just want total compliance and the complete erasure of female autonomy? The movie takes that concept and literalizes the horrific reality of what forced devotion actually looks like. All right, part 5, a breakout horror performance. Because let's be real, all of this heavy thematic lifting simply would not work without a central performance that grounds this high-concept horror in real, visceral, emotional devastation. And wow, Inde Navarrette delivers an absolute tour de force here. She essentially had to play 3 entirely distinct roles all at once: the normal, original Nikki, the terrifying possessed doppelganger, and then the heartbreaking reality of the real Nikki occasionally breaking through the possession just to scream for help. And incredibly, she pulled all of this off relying entirely on practical makeup and sheer physical acting. There was zero CGI or AI used to alter her face or her voice. It is just an unbelievably demanding physical performance. It's no surprise that critics have rightfully drawn a direct line between Navarrette's fearless, physically demanding performance and Isabelle Adjani's legendary turn in the 1981 horror masterpiece Possession. Navarrette somehow balances these manic, uncanny valley smiles with this desolate, full-body sadness that completely prevents the movie from just becoming another schlocky slasher. She genuinely makes you feel the true, deep tragedy of a character whose agency has been completely erased. And finally, Part 6, a new era of horror. To wrap up our explainer today, we really need to zoom out and look at the broader picture. What does this film's explosive success actually mean for the film industry and its creator, Curry Barker? Well, Curry Barker's trajectory is totally unprecedented. Just think about the leaps he's made. He went from making an $800 short film called Milk and Cereal that was released straight to YouTube to a $750,000 feature with Obsession backed by Focus Features. And now he's directing a multi-million-dollar Blumhouse project, and he's even been tapped by A24 to handle a massive reimagining of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre franchise. This entire pipeline happened in just a couple of years. It's completely redefining the model for Hollywood success. Barker really represents the emergence of the digital native filmmaker. We're talking about creators who totally bypass traditional film schools. They grew up editing their own YouTube videos, responding to immediate audience feedback in the comments, and developing this highly intuitive grasp of internet culture. They tend to favor messy, chaotic, really emotional aesthetics over traditional cinematic polish. And most importantly, they know exactly how to speak directly to the ambient, bubbling anxieties of their audience because, well, they've been in a constant, direct conversation with them online for years. Which leaves us with this final thought for today. As these internet-forged creators take the reins of major studio franchises, like Barker taking on Texas Chainsaw Massacre for A24, we really have to ask, is this the blueprint for the future of horror? Obsession proved that understanding modern digital relationship dynamics and internet-era entitlement can translate into hundreds of millions of dollars at the box office. So what dark, uncomfortable cultural anxieties will this new generation force us to confront next? Something to think about. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and I will see you next time.